So just to introduce you to the city of San Antonio itself, so it's located in the south central region of Texas, which is, of course, is one of the southernmost states of the United States. It's also America's seventh largest city. The city itself was founded as a Spanish mission colony, and so the missions themselves are older than the city and are actually a World Heritage Site, which happened during the councilman's term in office. Um, and it's not just the Alamo, right? We also have Mission Concepcion and several other missions that make up the city of San Antonio. When the city itself was founded in 1718, it would have been part of the country of Mexico, which at the time was still a Spanish colony. And then, of course, when Texas declared independence and then ultimately became a state, it became part of the United States. So we have a really interesting cultural and ethnic diversity in the city, and we are the fastest growing city in the country right now, and so we will probably be the sixth largest city, surpassing Philadelphia actually pretty soon. So the councilman that's joining us today is the councilman of District 1, which is this area of the city right here in the light pink. And so it does incorporate the downtown area, as well as all of our neighborhoods and a vast array of cultural and art resources. And so the district itself is very diverse as well. We do have the lowest income zip code of the city in the West End at the 78207, as well as some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city as well. And so it really is, and then we have neighborhoods where people only speak Spanish, right? And then we have neighborhoods of people of German ancestry. And so there really is a huge wide array of both concerns and people and interests that the councilman balances on a daily basis. So here are just some images of what District 1 looks like to give you an idea of what the district itself has to offer. This right here is known as the cenotaph. It's a monument that is placed in front of the Alamo that I'm sure we'll talk about today. And then we have some of our neighborhoods and downtown areas as well. So introducing the councilman, he is an architect licensed and practicing and has been the councilman for District 1 since 2014. He was actually appointed by the other council members and since has won elections and so has continued his term in office. He approaches counseling as a city by design approach, which is the way that we manage and really use the skills that we have in design in order to make the best city possible as it's rapidly growing and accommodating all of those different populations. He's also been a strong advocate for social justice in both policy and practice. I had the honor to serve the councilman as the Director of City Planning and Development, where I oversaw major zoning code amendments, infrastructure, city planning at his discretion, basically, and helping to advise him to balance all of those difficult decisions. So we're just gonna get started into the discussion, and then at the end, we will have opportunity for all of you to ask questions as well. So Councilman, first question I have for you is, how did you decide to go from being a practicing architect to running for office?
You know, that is the biggest question I get all the time around, sort of my career as an elected official, because I never thought I would have a career as an elected official. This was really born out of this idea that I always saw myself as an architect for the people, an architect that was going to change the world, transform my community, and it's something that unfortunately doesn't happen for a lot of people. You tend to kind of get siloed, and you do a specific kind of design work, and so I found myself really having to place myself more into the community. So I did have a practicing business as an architect, but I was not, I didn't see myself doing community projects, and therefore I volunteered to offer my services pro bono. I helped many different organizations that otherwise couldn't hire an architect, and so a lot of people have described the profession of architecture as something that is really meant for the affluent, or in fact, there's been several people who've called architects the house pets of the rich, and that really shouldn't be. Certainly, I did not get into this profession to be classified that way. I didn't grow up affluent. In fact, I grew up poor, and I wanted to use my knowledge to help solve big issues. And through the volunteering, I got to be put on boards and commissions. Julian Castro, then mayor of San Antonio, out of the blue, asked me if I would like to be appointed to the appraisal district. This is where we do property taxes, and I said I don't know anything about that. And he says that's exactly why we need you there, because we need somebody who can kind of be a critical thinker, but not have political ties to somebody and slant things a certain way. And that kind of began my political career. It is through that process that I began to know the different folks here in San Antonio. When then Diego Bernal, who was the councilman before me, resigned to go on and become state representative, I took the post. So that's essentially what happened.
And what would you say to somebody who's young in their profession and maybe comes from humble beginnings like yourself and is afraid of all the complexities of running for office, like campaign finance and gaining that political support?
For one, you'll learn it. And the most important aspect of what I do, I feel, is the passion. If you want to do it, go do it. I really believe that design professionals handle complexities better than most, and in fact, it's essentially what we do. We're problem solvers, and so we like to break things down into its essential things, and really try to find steps and increments towards a solution. So I can tell you that, in my opinion, and take it from me because I've been doing it now for 6 years, there needs to be more design professionals in elected office. A lot of elected officials are making the final decision when it comes to the built environment, the way the city or the community is shaped. It all boils down to a group of people that have no background or expertise on these matters, and so having people in those positions, in those seats, I think helps to make sure that voice is heard. So just please consider that this is something that can be. It doesn't even have to be your sort of long-term career, but certainly a part of your career as you grow. It'll help you shape the way you're able to speak publicly, make presentations, and I think it'll help you grow as an individual. It's a great step that I feel I have taken, and I'm going to recommend. There's a great book called The Ethics of the Urban, and it really speaks to a lot of this, and talks about how the urban environment it carries forth a lot of sort of our ethics as a community. So who understands that better than design professionals?
Absolutely. And you're still a practicing architect. I keep trying to make you bigger, but I don't think it's going to happen. So you are still a practicing architect, right? So you didn't have to give that up to go into office. And how has being in office made you a stronger architect?
That's another great point, because I think what makes a good architect, and I'm going to say design professional, because I think it's whether you're an industrial designer, architect, interior designer, a designer. What makes a good designer is one who is cultivated. So you must cultivate yourself in a way that you can empathize with your client, that you can understand some of the goals and objectives that people are after. And so in this role, the way it's made me, I think, a better architect has really been around, cultivating that empathy, cultivating that sense of understanding that there is a lot of diversity in our community, that there is a lot of differences, but those differences can be brought together with a lot of the things that bring us together in common. And so it's really in fact, I say this a lot. Design is not about objects. Design is about people. So in this job, you really get to know a lot of people, and I think that makes you a better person.
Definitely. So, how have you, in your capacity as an elected official, been able to advocate for that diverse community in District 1?
Well, there's a lot of examples that I can list, and the first one is actually being completed as we speak. I think we're going to move in next month back into City Hall. Is an old historic building, and across Texas there's all these historic buildings, and I'm sure like in Philadelphia, uh, and there was a time that the American Disabilities Act, which was, I think it was in 1994 when it was first implemented, the ADA. Before that, there was nothing mandating that the front door of anything had to be accessible, and so our city hall, it just simply wasn't accessible. And think about this: City Hall, if you were in a wheelchair or just couldn't climb up a flight of stairs, had to go around the back to the basement, ring a doorbell, be escorted up an elevator to the front. And I just feel like that just sends the wrong message. I helped to create a design competition to prove that we could change that. And again, I'm going to point out that it was city management, our city manager, and we have a city manager, assistant city managers. None of them are design professionals, and they all came back saying that it couldn't be done. It's impossible to change this historic building into an accessible building. Well, I will send you guys some pictures later to show you the brilliant design that came about because of it. And so it's, again, sending the right message. We also helped to create a program called the San Antonio Under One Roof, the only program of its kind in the entire country where, houses are falling apart, and if we fix the roof, then we do the most good. And so understanding sort of like what are the most important parts of a structure to help translate where we should, put our investment is so critical. And so I tell people that if it's one axiom I want to change, is that the foundation is the most important part of a building, and that's not true. It's the roof. And so we've done over 1,000 roofs through this program, which means at least the way I like to see it is we've saved 1,000 homes here in San Antonio because of this program with very little money. But it also translates to like bigger things like zoning and the way we've looked at neighborhoods and protecting the character of neighborhoods and what that means, what the community wants to salvage and what they cherish in their community around neighborhoods. So it's amazing. But when I got into this role, as we just talked about, you typically don't have an architect doing this. In fact, I'm the first architect in San Antonio to be on city council. And yet it seems like, I would say 85% of the time we're talking about design issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And the two programs that you mentioned, the City Hall and the Under One Roof, were actually both started without using city funds, right? I mean, they were later incorporated into the general budget, but you did not have funding to start those initiatives.
Right, that's correct. Like with anything else, and it's just like an architect has to do. Sometimes you have to sort of prototype something or prove it and show somebody. I have a painting at home of Filippo Brunelleschi, and I don't know if you know him. He's of course he's the architect who designed the Florence Cathedral, or at least the dome. And people think he designed the entire cathedral. He only designed the dome. And it's a great painting of him showing an egg to this group, saying, look, the shape of this egg is how we're going to achieve this dome. And I like that painting because sometimes you just have to show people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen you do that again and again in office, right? Where you just have to say like, no, let me like show you how to do it, and then it becomes policy, right? And so it's breaking those norms, and making a new norm, right? That's better for everybody, not just the privileged few, right? So let's talk a little bit about those controversial decisions that you've had to make in office. So you've made a lot, and you definitely love to stir the pot, which is one of the things I appreciate about you so much. But let's start with the monuments, right? So the first major monument, of course, was the cenotaph, right, that you had to come up against. And then there was a Confederate statue that you co-signed the CCR with Councilman Shaw. And then most recently, of course, removing the Columbus statue. And so talk about those three experiences and what those were like for you, and then also, why those were important initiatives in office.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first one was really the cenotaph sort of continues at the Alamo, and I'll talk about that last. So I'll start with the Confederate monument at Travis Park. So San Antonio is known as the Alamo City, and it's got the history of the Alamo. And the reason we have Travis Park is named after William Travis, who was Colonel Travis at the Alamo, died at the Alamo. And in the middle, there was a statue. There was an obelisk. At the very top was a soldier pointing up to the sky. And for years, including myself, I have to admit, a lot of us thought, well, gosh, that's William Travis. Until you find, unless you look more closely, you realize that's not William Travis. That was put there by the daughters of the Confederacy at the turn of the century, last century. And it was controversial then. It was controversial to this day, and it's basically a monument to honor the Confederacy and Confederate soldiers. More importantly, to a lot of people, it's served as a reminder, and we know this because this is sort of the wave of Confederate monuments that occurred throughout the South. As like these are reminders of who's still in power. And to not forget, even though the Civil War the South lost the Civil War, that this will serve as a reminder of who's still in power. And it was just an unfortunate reminder. When we went through that, of course, the people that pushed back the most are very ignorant of history. A lot of them thought it was William Travis. We had to correct them and say, that's not William Travis. Some of them thought it was Robert E. Lee. It wasn't even Robert E. Lee. And so the few that were left are just simply, just not wanting or believe that this kind of imagery is a problem for a city, especially a city like San Antonio, a city that's got a history, that has redlined essentially a lot of the economic segregation. This is real in San Antonio, and it exists today. We're predominantly Hispanic community. And we're still economically segregated, almost down to what you can trace it all the way back to the Battle of the Alamo and what happened there. And so these kinds of things are so important for us to get past. Monument, we were able to take it down swiftly. There was a group, a militia group known as This Is Texas Freedom Force, and they started, I believe, just about that time. They've recently been labeled by the FBI as a hate militia group. And it's just really an unfortunate time for our country to have these kind of groups, because they're trying to sort of force this ideology on people. And monuments, by the way, are not meant to be permanent either, right? Monuments go up all the time based on the ideology of that group or the time. Point in fact, I mean, you've got monuments all over Europe and just all over the world, for that matter, that symbolize different things. Of course, the Columbus statue at Christopher Columbus Park, now that's a little different. And the reason we were able to negotiate that very peacefully was because we have one of the oldest Italian societies in the entire country. And like, it's kind of amazing because you would say, no, man, Philadelphia's got to have something much older than San Antonio. But in fact, there was a whole southern section of Italy, the Calabria region, that in the 1890s, they all came down and moved to San Antonio and into this one area. Of course, the Italian families of the time identified with Christopher Columbus as a way to say, like, we belong here. And that's why they named their society the Christopher Columbus Italian Society. The entire area around that park was an Italian neighborhood. To this day, they do spaghetti dinners. They help the community out in so many ways. And they knew what was happening. I worked with them and negotiated that, you know what, maybe it's time to remove this monument and return it to them untouched, so that they can keep it as part of their history, and they have it at their hall. But more importantly, they recognize that, you know, while this is a different kind of history to them, it represents something else now to the broader community. So they took that in. Again, a great example of coordinating a peaceful transition. And then now the cenotaph. So the cenotaph, done by a sculptor named Copini, is right in the middle of the Alamo. And as we're trying to sort of redevelop, you know, what the history of the Alamo is, a lot of people in San Antonio will tell you that the history is not as accurate as you would be led to believe. In fact, there's been a lot of, you know, sort of the Disneyfication of things, right? With the Davy Crockett show that I grew up with, and I went to David Crockett Elementary, and then there was the John Wayne Alamo. All of that is just a Hollywood dramatization, and people have heard me say it's bunk, and I'll say it again, it's bunk. In fact, in the movie they talked about, you know, that they got to go north to Goliad when Goliad is south. It's like they can't even get that right. But history is so important, especially in this city, and I'll tell you why. As I touched on early, getting into this conversation, which was our city to this day, because of where you're located, may determine your economic status, your economic segregation. Many people have heard of the William Travis letter, right? And he wrote a very, very powerful letter saying that, you know, he to all Americans of the world, you know, it was a call to arms. But most people don't know the last letter that he wrote, which was a very unfortunate letter. And we have to make sure that people understand history fully. And he wrote a letter, the last letter, when he knew that nobody was coming, and he was very upset, specifically because the city of San Antonio at the time, there was thousands and thousands of people. I mean, I would say maybe 15, 20,000 people living in San Antonio. 183 men were inside the fortified Mission San Antonio de Valero, known as the Alamo, and the city did not come to his defense, and he was very resentful of that. So he wrote that this city should be seen as a public enemy, and all their property taken to repair and repay for this war effort. Well, you know, I think you could draw a line from that moment and that sentiment to today, and just sort of how property, land, all transitioned. 90% of the land in San Antonio was owned by Hispanics. That completely flipped right after the Battle of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution. And, you know, that makes an impact to this day that people feel, and it has shaped our city since.
Yeah, that's a great point that you're making, because for the early portion of San Antonio as a city, right, even though there was such a predominant Mexican at the time, right, population, even getting into elected office, there was such a white predominant representation for most of San Antonio's history, and it's not even until recent decades that started to change, right? I love walking down that hallway into city council chambers, where you have all these portraits of, you know, former mayors of San Antonio, and they all look like Teddy Roosevelt. I always thought they've all got the same glasses and the same haircut, and you know, it isn't until you get to the newer ones that you see a different representation, right?
That's right.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about climate change. So you've initiated several programs in the city of San Antonio that started in the downtown area, but have certainly spread throughout the city at this point to try to make a more resilient city to climate change. And San Antonio's climate itself is already very warm, and so things like the urban heat island, drought impacts are made worse by the location and climate that the city has. So let's talk about your experiences in office fighting climate change.
Yeah, well, especially as an architect, we know that the thing that impacts heat the most in any city is the built environment. It's literally the buildings themselves, right? The buildings, the roads, the bridges, all that creates uh, an exorbitant amount of heat. And what we're really trying to combat here is how do we mitigate heat in our city? Because if we don't mitigate that, it translates into so many things like air quality issues, but it also is combated with sort of an increase in utility consumption because you're trying to offset that amount of heat with a mechanical device, but then you create a bigger problem because now you're running this huge power plant that is in almost any community the biggest polluter in the area. So I think it's a balance. I think we have to build a smarter city. And it's not going to just be simply finding those smart thermostats to adjust the mechanical devices. It's about how we can actually utilize sort of these long long held strategies for heat dissipation when it comes to design. Air conditioning's only been around I think it's less than 100 years now. It was actually invented here in San Antonio.
Yes, it was.
And and so if you think about the fact that design a building today without this idea that you can climate control the building itself. And that's how buildings were designed for thousands of years, right? Up until just 100 years ago. And so if you start there and this idea that you don't overload the mechanical systems, then you have created a great, incredible impact, a domino effect that improves air quality, helps save money because you're not creating this utility consumption, but you also don't put this load on a power plant. One of the biggest concerns we have is that as you grow, that somehow the state of Texas has to kind of now go build another power plant somewhere. And what does that mean? Especially as we're trying to sort of build these offset these power plants with solar farms and wind farms to maybe eliminate these coal-fired plants. So we've got to be smarter. The Under One Roof program that I created, I took advantage of the fact that, hey, if the city's gonna repair your roof, then we're gonna get to dictate the color of that roof, and we just change it to a color white. And of course, we know white is just physics. Will offset the temperature, and we've done the testing. The surface temperature of a white roof and a black roof is 40 degrees difference. But what it means to somebody in their pocketbook is almost $2,000 in utility savings a year in San Antonio. So that's a big deal, and that's how we can improve that. We also started the tree fund, and that's where we're planting more and more trees. This actually came about because a tornado hit in my neighborhood, and the first thing that people brought up was, "Hey, are you going to help us bring the trees back?" Because this particular neighborhood where the tornado hit had beautiful tree coverage, and it just inspired us to say, look, we can do so much more. We recently had a shade competition for downtown to demonstrate the importance of shade, and we split the prize between an architectural device of shade and just simply somebody who came up with this great way to do trees everywhere through pots and sort of arranging them in a unique way. So we've got to be thinking about the environment. We as the design professionals get to not just design the spaces, but we spec out the materials too. And in many cases, you can spec out a material that will make such a positive impact on the amount of heat mitigation that cities today are really looking for, and helps to offset. So instead of just finding mechanical systems to offset heat, we're finding passive systems that don't create the heat in the first place. So those are some examples of how we can address climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the tree ordinance, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about the state of Texas, but the state of Texas did pass a law that kind of prohibits the city's ability to protect trees on property. And so, in your experiences as an elected official, are there other examples, or do you want to talk about that example of how the state government sometimes preempts the city's initiatives of trying to make the city a better place for everyone?
Yeah, so in the state of Texas, it's kind of it's unique in that you'll find that the urban areas, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, the Rio Grande Valley, are generally areas that are more progressive. They follow the science, they follow the data, and but we have a lot of rural areas, and so our state is essentially sort of balancing the differences between the cities and the rural areas. And unfortunately, at our state legislature, you have a lot of representatives that represent these rural areas, and a governor that unfortunately, you know, chasing those votes and chasing that ideology, it tends to really hurt all the efforts that cities are trying to implement when it comes to these progressive ideas. Now, they shouldn't even be political. This is just science, but as we know, science has become political, and it's really unfortunate. But that's the state of affairs in Texas, and we hope that that Texas can hopefully someday, step away from that way of thinking that sort of shuns the science, and and sort of empowers the cities to continue to take these measures that really help everybody.
I think the last question I'm going to have for you before we turn it over to the group is about historic preservation. So a lot of people in the design profession or in city planning see historic preservation as something that inherently stagnates progress. And of course, in District 1, there are a lot of historic resources, and there are more historic districts than any other parts of the city. And so, how have you balanced in your position as an elected official the needs to move the city forward while also preserving those areas and cultural and historic monuments and buildings of the city that are so important to the community?
Yeah, and that's a great question. The answer is it depends on who you're asking, and we try to balance as much as we can. Our focus is to try to balance. You're really almost not. There's going to be a time where you just don't make somebody happy, but our approach is also to maybe look at historic preservation uh, different from historic conservation, and understanding the differences between the two. And I'll give a couple examples. Is that there are times where we're trying to save something because it is contributing to the nature and the character and history of our city. And we have so many examples in San Antonio because of it. Of course, the Alamo is one, but I mean, we have so many just in the skyline that's watercolored behind you, Chrissy. A lot of those buildings are historic as well, and they provide. I see the Tower Life building, which was an Ateliers design and a beautiful example. Yeah, that's it. There you go. And and so we want to make sure that we're preserving as much of that as possible. But then there are also some times where a building to be saved in its entirety and then asked to be repurposed for what we're needing today can become an impossible task. And so that's when I think the idea of understanding where that history is and what part of that building can you incorporate it into the new design, can you make it a part of how you build around the city. That is sort of the $1 million question of how we go about that. The short answer for me has always been, let's let the architects, the design professionals, give us their design solutions, and then we can discuss it with the experts, right? And so that's where we can actually take a look. It's kind of like when we talked about with City Hall, when city management said it's an impossibility. You cannot make the front doors of City Hall ultra accessible. It won't work. Well, we did it, and we did it through design professionals studying it and coming up with different solutions. And I think when you're looking at historic preservation, I think you can do a similar thing. You know that there's a need to preserve the history, but allow the architect that you've hired, that you hired through a process, which is also important, that process hires the qualified expertise needed to address that situation, and then let the design professionals make that determination.
Sure, absolutely. And you have at multiple occasions looked at city contracts and tried to make sure that they're hiring the best and certainly the professionals and companies that represent the interests of the city. And anybody who wants to know more can Google it. I don't think we need to talk about that.
Well, in fact, what I'll mention is there's a good friend of mine. We've become friends, and he is just one of the most talented architects in the entire world. He's right there in Philadelphia. It's George Scarmeas of PDP. He's the master planner who came up with the master plan for the Alamo, and PDP is an incredible group, and they're based right there out of Philadelphia. Of course, they also did Independence Square, and it's great to get to run into people as talented and as knowledgeable as them.
Sure, absolutely. I was thinking of the Chick-fil-A one, but we won't talk. Just Google the councilman's name and Chick-fil-A, and you'll learn everything you need to know that way.
That made international news.
Yes, it did.
And again, I mean, all I can say on that is that we believe nothing supersedes human rights. Period.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of people who really appreciate that you took a stand in office, even though it did certainly become such a political conversation. Let's take some questions from the group. So if you have a question for the councilman, you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat, whichever works best for you. Dustin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for organizing this, Chrissy, and thank you so much, Roberto, for coming. This is what an excellent conversation, and I really enjoyed the direction of the conversation as well. I suppose I have just a kind of a follow-up question, or maybe just a comment, something that I really enjoyed how you all were speaking about, not only the importance of coming to terms with monuments that really cause strain in communities, that keep people up at night, and trying to rid our spaces of those, and how that also, I guess, translates into something that you mentioned at the beginning, and the importance of diversity in cities and language, and the significance of maintaining preserving that language as well. And I guess I would be wondering if, when you approach as an elected official, how much do you speak in San Antonio in English and in Spanish? And then also, out of curiosity, as we're talking about, decolonizing our city spaces, if there's also indigenous groups in San Antonio that you're also having conversations with, that might, make bridges between the Mexican population and the indigenous population, and also other populations that have that type of connection, where they're also trying to come to terms with their own difficult past. But I really appreciated those comments about architecture and monuments, because it seems like it does go straight into language as well.
It does, and thank you for that question. So here's an interesting fact, and it really boils down to power and who's in power, and to your point about monuments, is that monuments are designed to remind people who's in charge, who's in power, and because of that, for a long time in San Antonio, we didn't even offer Spanish translation. Now, I think about this again. You would think that by the time I got into office, which was in 2014, that would have been taken care of, but it wasn't. I actually had to write a policy in 2016 to provide, as a policy, Spanish translation at City Hall, and it's amazing, but it took this long. And again, to your point about all the other languages of San Antonio is an incredibly diverse community, and there was people here 10,000 years ago. So to assume that somehow everything sort of existed starting in 1718 is also not true. We have many indigenous groups, many Native American tribes. They were driven out of here, and part of the mission settlements, and we've got to also be honest about this. Part of the mission settlements were simply to, they would take in a lot of the indigenous, and they became indentured to that mission to work on it and exist within those mission settlements. And there's a lot of indigenous groups that to this day want us to recognize that history, that it wasn't an easy transition, and it was a way that a lot of cultures sort of got erased because of the missions that came in at the direction of the church back then, and Spain. So there are groups here. There's the Yanaguana groups that existed here. There's many Native American tribes that they're no longer here. They might be in Oklahoma or even Nebraska, and I've learned, I mean, these are tribes that were here but driven away, and so we've got to acknowledge that that's a real history. And if we're going to be telling history about San Antonio, and language plays a big role, we've got to acknowledge that. There's the Top Palam that plays a major role in educating people about our indigenous history here in San Antonio. And then you asked a very interesting question about, like, how often do I speak Spanish? It's every single day. In fact, in about an hour, I got an interview with our Spanish news station here, Telemundo, to talk about any number of things. And it's so critical because, as I mentioned, 2/3 of our city is Hispanic. There's a large percentage of that population, especially our older population, that only speaks Spanish. And if we do not communicate to that population, they're essentially left out, and we can't allow that. We've got to embrace our entire community. We also have a large population of undocumented in San Antonio. While Chrissy mentioned that this is kind of considered Central South Texas, if you get in a car from where I am right now and you drive south for 4 hours, you'll get to my hometown, which is on the border in McAllen. And so there's, South Texas is just such a rich area. A great read would just simply look up the treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that is essentially the treaty that sort of defined the borders between United States and Mexico, and you'll find that, hey, a lot of Hispanics were here, and then sort of the line just went this way. Once it used to be this over on this side, now it's on this side, And part of the treaty was really asking the U.S. government to please allow the people that were already here to stay here and to be treated fairly. Unfortunately, we know that history just didn't happen. For years, there was a poor treatment of the people that were here, that includes San Antonio, right? And the Texas Rangers, to a lot of people, are seen as heroes, but to a lot of Mexican Americans, they call them rinches. There's a terrible history. There was a brutal history of property and land taken because of that power shift and that dynamic. So part of that culture, whether it's our food, our language, just look at me. I mean, my mother, there's a saying in Spanish, my mother says it all the time. It's like, tienes el nopal pintado en la torre. And nopal is a cactus. And it just says, you have the cactus painted on your forehead, which means you look Mexican. You can't get away with it. And it's like, that's just the way it is. And be proud of it. And so that's who we are here in San Antonio. We should embrace it. We embrace every culture.
Yeah. And to add to the councilman's comments about bringing translation services to City Hall, the extension of that and what continued was also bringing those translation services to just basic city boards and commissions, including something as fundamental as zoning. And, when I was observing those zoning commissions on the councilman's behalf, I can't tell you how many times we would have somebody come in, they got a notice because there was a development in their neighborhood, and they thought they were being evicted because the notice is in English. It has, a map of their property, and it says, especially if you're talking about historic designation or large rezoning like the military protections, the language in there says the city is, something about acting on the behalf of the property owner and will take control of their recommendation. I can't remember the exact wording, but the way it's worded, it sounds like the city is taking your property. And especially for those who do not speak English, having those now translated has made a huge impact into bringing those people into the conversations for planning and development.
And I want to make one other quick point on this, especially because this is an academic discussion that we're having. And I had a translator tell me once that translation should not be about words, it should be about meaning. And so just like anything else, we want people to understand what is being said and what's being communicated, because that is at the heart of any community. We want to make sure that people know their rights, they know what is actually happening, to Chrissy's point.
So I think we have time for one more question. Yasmin, I saw that you raised your hand. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, yeah, so let me take that away real quick. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you briefly about the intersection of the historic component of the city and the climate change component that you spoke on briefly. SA Climate Ready, the climate action and adaptation plan for the city, has a couple grand objectives. And one of them is the adoption of the IECC. And I was wondering, as an architect and also as a councilman, do you view the amount of historic buildings in the city as a major obstacle for IECC adoption, just because we know that it has often been applied selectively in that case?
Yeah, but I think it's part of it has been because the people that view that are not design professionals, right? In that, I'll ask you to, depending on which historic building you're talking about, but most historic buildings, again, like I said, were designed pre-mechanical devices, pre-air conditioning. And if anything, a lot of our historic buildings are designed to be better suited for climate adaptive, I can't say the word, climate, really to really adapt to the climate. And so what's happened over time, though, with a lot of these historic buildings is that they've been modernized, and they change the way it's supposed to work, and it no longer functions in a passive way to deal with heat mitigation. So I will tell you and I've seen it, because there are buildings and projects here where they hired the design professionals to do the right thing, to understand the ability to use the historic design in a way that actually does a magnificent job of adapting to the climate. In fact, there's a building that just built here for our accredited agency called Credit Human, by a gentleman or the CEO who is just really into understanding or make an impact on climate change. And he designed a classical building. It's a classically designed building. It's brick and stone and glass. And you would say, well, that doesn't seem like it's doing that, but it is essentially a net zero carbon neutral building, and it's in the way you design it. So you got to use, you got to understand what thermal masses are. You got to understand what heat mitigation devices are, how shading comes into play, and how you incorporate technology into those things so that they're all working together. So no, I don't see it as an obstacle. And the obstacle is when somebody refuses to get the experts to look at it.
And to add on to that as well, Councilman, is that native technologies are often the best technologies for that climate. And one of the things that happened while you were in office is just simply re-allowing Pueblo construction in the building code, which of course had been prohibited, which is best suited to that climate.
That was actually something that this office worked on. We worked with the Earth and Construction Institute, and we're one of the first. I think we are the first city in Texas to have it in their code to allow to build with earthen materials. Imagine that. I mean, they were building with earthen materials before there was Texas. So it's kind of funny that we had to kind of take this long route.
Well, we're almost out of time, Councilman. Thank you so much for taking the time today. It was an honor to work with you. It's an honor to talk to you again. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with as sort of a last minute, maybe your favorite thing that you've done in office, or what your overarching experience has been as you're about to run for your last term?
Well, for one, Chrissy, I want to say what a pleasure it was to have you work for us. In fact, she's also a good example of somebody just passionate, and she didn't know zoning. She tackled it. She came to us with no experience for the job she was applying for, but we hired her for her heart, and she is truly somebody that we still talk about here in San Antonio. Neighborhoods talk about her. She's literally a legend. And so thank you for that. And, I'll say that for all of you, Chrissy's a great resource. So reach out to her often. I'll leave you with this. What I think I've learned that has impacted me the most is again, it's just how we all need to work together to help one another and to help our community. So in this job, it has allowed me to do that directly. But I will encourage you as a design professional to consider how your job is as a design professional is so interconnected with some of the most important things that we can think of that exist in the world, and I think will ever exist in the world. And that's how we treat people and shelter. So what I mean by that is that whether you're talking about affordable housing or homeless population, we have a responsibility to tackle this. We have a responsibility to do something, to take action. And sometimes it's a little action, sometimes it's a big step. The point is to do something. And so I just want to encourage everybody to think about these things. Right now, sort of my mission in life right now in this job is to combine the efforts of housing and homelessness as one effort, as one real effort, because they really do match, and they are part of the same thing. And there's no reason why in a country like the United States of America, in all the things we've just discussed in terms of technology and climate adaptability, there was the word, that somehow within all those strategies, we're not thinking about the most basic tenets of shelter. And I have people literally right just outside this window that are there. We're trying to help. We're trying to get them sheltered. There is a homeless population in just about every community. I know there's one in Philadelphia. When I see the snow in the background there, you can't help but think that people may be suffering in a terrible way. And here, I mean, you can see the sun's out. It's not quite as bad. I mean, it's still pretty cold at night here, but you know, I just want to leave you with that. You know, let's find a way to combine the efforts of housing and homelessness into one focused goal.
Thank you so much, Councilman. And I think I can be free to say this, but if anyone would like to do a mobile internship, perhaps, and work with the Councilman's office, I'm sure he would be happy to have anybody who wants to work with the Councilman and his office. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. And we hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Councilman. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.